Good evening, everybody. We are back. We are on a new away days, and what better away days to have than with the main man, Chris? How you doing?
Good, mate. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. And always, when we have an away day, there is no better way to prepare for the next game that Newcastle United have without having an opposition's fan, or is he? We've got the one and only Ben Jacobs. Thank you for joining us, Ben. How are you right now?
I'm good, Pete. It's good to be talking to a Newcastle fan. Or are you? Who better to compare a visit to Leicester than with a Leicester-born presenter who is wearing a Newcastle shirt, but really should, if we're going by the geography of football rules, be a Leicester City supporter?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And you know what? I've grown up with that question being asked of me all the time. But look, I know where my allegiances lie. I'm black and white through and through. There'll be no change in me, Ben. But we're going to certainly work on you tonight during the show. No doubt about it. Now, just before we get started, obviously there is a big game for Leicester at the moment, and I know we're all watching it. I know you've been watching it, Ben, as well. It's currently 3-2 to Napoli, which means at the moment that Leicester finished third in the Europa League table and actually puts them out of the competition. So, how are you feeling right now? Like, is it's getting down to the sort of the last 5 minutes of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be glancing away in the next 5 minutes or so and hopefully not shouting any profanities. Leicester have been poor, to be honest. The Napoli games have been very entertaining if you're a neutral, so I'm sure Newcastle fans are enjoying watching the match. But again, and this is good from a Newcastle perspective, if you're kind of scouting Leicester, we've seen two things that have been a pattern of Leicester's season, unfortunately, since the very beginning of 2021-2022. And that's one, they can't keep clean sheets, and two, they're not quite as clinical or as sharp at the other end as they traditionally have been over the last few seasons. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're poor in front of goal, but it's just those kind of one-on-ones. Sometimes they're only half chances that you expect a Vardy to take, or more simpler opportunities tonight for Maddison and Daka. And on all three occasions with those three players, they've missed against Napoli. And that cutting edge in front of goal, coupled with not being able to keep clean sheets, is a bad formula if you want to win games. So, of course, they're still only one goal away from a draw that would see them qualify. But by the same token, with where Leicester currently are in the table, way off the run for Champions League football, the Europa League should be a big priority. So even though this has been a difficult group for Leicester, it's a really disappointing way to finish if Leicester end up in third place.
I have to agree with you. I think going back to Newcastle in sort of the early 2000s, we had opportunities to really progress in the UEFA Cup, and we didn't take those opportunities to win a European trophy. And I 100% agree with you. I think, it's a great opportunity in the Europa League that hasn't got too many big hitters in there currently. I know, Barcelona will soon join that, but it's a great opportunity to win a trophy. So it'll be a shame to go out at this stage for Leicester. But I think you've touched on a few points that I'd like to kind of go into really. So we'll get into Leicester City. Obviously, that's our opposition. We travelled to the King Power Stadium on Sunday for a 2:00 kickoff. And you touched on and talked about the fact that you guys at the moment are conceding a lot of goals. Now, normally we wouldn't consider Leicester to be that type of team, knowing the type of talent that you've got within the squad. What has been sort of the big reasons for that? What has been the big changes this season that have gone from a team that didn't concede many and scored a lot of goals to kind of like the flip reverse, really? You're conceding a lot of goals and not really scoring as many as you'd like.
I think Leicester, when they won the Premier League, were just really tight, and they had players at their peak with a little bit more experience, most notably, say, the captain, Wes Morgan. And since winning the Premier League, the older defenders that we've had have kind of been found out a little bit more and ultimately phased out. And since Brendan Rodgers has come in, it's a much more attack-minded defence who like to keep the ball, play out with it, overlap, use the channels. And again, it leaves you very susceptible at the back. So Fofana is obviously a big miss, because despite the fact that he's young, there's your kind of cool head at the back. And Maguire, when he was at the club before he moved to Manchester United, still added a little bit more experience. But I think every Leicester fan will tell you for the last 3 or 4 years, really, we've needed centre-backs. Simple as that. And then when you look at Johnny Evans, Castagne, Pereira, you won't find a Leicester fan that doesn't want them in the team. But whatever combination you play in terms of your wider defenders, they're again very attack-minded. So there's instantly pressure on, say, an Ndidi or a holding midfielder, Tielemans as well, although he's more encouraged to get box to box. But whoever's in the centre of the park is constantly having to get box to box and track back. And when your centre-backs and your wing-backs are able to control the line and also the game and come forwards in a more measured way and move the ball forwards quicker as well, because if they're playing longer, direct, more positive passes, then they're not having to necessarily sprint forwards as far. Their role is to play the release rather than to run off the ball. And under Brendan Rodgers, they're being encouraged a bit more to run off the ball and get wider and further up the field, whereas actually under Ranieri, Leicester were looking for quicker releases from deeper. And that wasn't just through the defenders. Danny Drinkwater was doing that to great effect too, setting off Jamie Vardy. But it meant that the defenders could hold a more static and safe position. So, of course, you had less numbers going forwards, but it didn't matter because you had Jamie Vardy's pace and Riyad Mahrez's creativity back in those days. But now the impetus when Leicester attack is not necessarily going through, let's say, a James Maddison or even a Tielemans. It's the wing-backs that are being encouraged to come forwards. And although they're very, very good players, Pereira's not hit his sort of peak before he got injured in his opening season for the club. Evans has been superb. Castagne started very, very brightly, but has kind of gone off the boil a little bit as well in terms of his consistency. So, these are players that can grab headlines because they very much shine on their day going forwards. But actually, if you're being hypercritical about them as just defenders, it's not a very strong defence. Probably the best defender in there at the moment with Fofana out there is the goalkeeper Kasper Schmeichel, and he's being tested too often. So although he's making some outstanding saves, eventually he's going to get beaten, and we've seen that time and time again this season.
Yeah, the change of style does affect certain players, and I do remember that season. Danny Drinkwater from deep, Vardy running in and behind. It was a lethal combination, and it was great to watch. Even though we weren't supporting the club at the time, it was a great attacking football, and that's what you want to see. But yeah, there has been a notable difference. You talked about Pereira as well, who's a very, very talented player, but had a really bad ACL injury, and it's always difficult to recover from that. There's a question in the chat that we've been alluded to, and Chris, I don't know if you want to put that up.
Yeah, I will flash it up now, mate.
A question all Newcastle fans have been asking really since he left the club is that, what is happening, Ben, to Ayoze Perez at Leicester? He's hardly getting a game now. Obviously, he made the switch from us when Rafa Benitez left. He had a 30 million buyout clause in his contract. He wanted to push to play European football and to win trophies, and ultimately he has done that. But finds himself out of the team at the moment. Is there anything in particular, any real reason why that is happening?
I just think deep down he was brought in to a Leicester side that was in Europe and challenging one step up for Champions League football. So there's an element of depth there. And Iheanacho's form has vastly improved over probably the last 18 months or so. Yeah. And Jamie Vardy, even if people think he's waning, is still an automatic name on Brendan Rodgers' team sheet. And Perez, therefore, has played behind a lead striker, but been used in a squad capacity predominantly off the bench. And I honestly think that Leicester signed him with that in mind. And he reminds me, therefore, of the role and the responsibilities of a kind of Shinji Okazaki when he was at Leicester. And Okazaki was quite content to drop even deeper and play far more defensive-minded. Perez is meant to be more of a threat and has a bit more freedom to be attack-minded, perhaps, than Okazaki, who largely stayed out of the box. And I think that Perez has got a more clinical nature to him and is meant to kind of hound defenders and stay very tight to them. But ultimately, when he was signed right through until now, He's just not had the qualities or the form. Some would argue it's because he hasn't had a run in the side, but he's just not really had the right qualities for the style that Leicester have played. But also there's simply been other better, with no disrespect to Perez, but stronger players form-wise and tactics-wise that fit into Brendan Rodgers' system. And I do feel a little bit sorry for Perez, because you sort of look at the waning of his stats. So I think when Leicester signed him, he got 12 odd goals for Newcastle in the Premier League. And I think he'd almost got into double figures in the Premier League the season before. And then he comes to Leicester and he had a very similar season. I think he got 8 goals in the Premier League in 2019, 2020. And you thought, right, he's going to kick on. But last season he was poor. He played, I think, well over 35 times and he only scored 3 goals in all competitions. And I mentioned before that Leicester aren't clinical, and he unfortunately falls into that capacity. And I know that he'll offer a lot off the ball. I know he'll offer plenty of assists and runs that drag other defenders out of position. I know that he can cross the ball as well, and he's got an incisive eye for passing. So I'm not saying goals are everything, but when you sign someone with his price tag, and last season he got 3 goals for Leicester City in over 35 games, that's never going to put him in contention to start football matches. And then this season he hasn't scored in the Premier League. He's only got 1 goal in all competitions. And that's the big problem, that you've got a Leicester City side who desperately need goals, and he's not scoring them. And I wonder whether Newcastle would take him back. But if you took him back, I don't think he would get into that Newcastle United side now because of the form of Callum Wilson, ASM, but I even think Joe Linton, who's massively improved under Eddie Howe, is keeping Perez out of the side. So I think if he went back to Newcastle, he'd perversely, even though I think Leicester are stronger on paper than Newcastle, be in exactly the same position as he is now.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hold you there because there's been a lot of entertainment in the last couple of minutes. Okay, so the final results in, Leicester have lost 3-2 against Napoli. However, Legia Warsaw through VAR were just given a penalty, and it's just been saved in the time.
98th minute.
Yeah, it's still there's the game's still playing now. Now I think Yano in the chat is slightly ahead of us, so this is entertainment century. I feel like I'm Jeff Stelling for a little bit now. It's still going. I think I'm a little bit behind. So Yano, if you get the final whistle before me, please whack it in the chat, and anyone else that's watching. There's still an opportunity here because they are still attacking, that Leicester, even though losing, still might go through. But there was a golden chance. There was a golden chance to still go through with that penalty, and it was saved by the goalkeeper. It's a poor penalty, if I've got to be honest. It was right kind of down the middle of the goal. And Yano's just put up there the 9th minute of 4 minutes extra. But Geordie 2 for Life has just said it's full time now. And that Leicester are now sort of officially out. So a little bit of entertainment there in that. But sort of kind of, obviously, you've talked on your thoughts about Leicester potentially going out. It is disappointing. But do you think this now gives them a real shot at kind of parachuting yourself sort of up the league with pace, now that you can just focus on Premier League football?
Yeah, I mean, it's incentive to have a response against Newcastle. It's probably not a good result from Newcastle's point of view, because Leicester are naturally going to want to bounce back, as any football team does. But like you say, it crystallises the fact that they now have to focus only domestically on getting back into Europe as a bare minimum. We've got Watford in the FA Cup, which is a nice chance to see Claudio Ranieri again in a short space of time after we beat Watford in the league. But, 11th place in the Premier League table is not good enough for Leicester City. In terms of shooting up the table, not really as worried about that, because we're on 19 points at the moment. You win one, you're immediately on 21. That's only 1 place outside the European spots. You win 2, and even though 1 or 2 teams like Tottenham have got games in hand, you can actually find yourself in 5th place. So I think last weekend sort of showed that we're actually back in the league, a bit like when Leicester won the Premier League, where everyone is beating everyone, and Chelsea went from top to 3rd place, and Liverpool needed a last-minute winner against Wolves. And Manchester City, although they're looking very convincing at the back, where they've only conceded 9 goals, are certainly not scoring as many goals as they have in previous seasons yet. It's Liverpool that are scoring all of the goals, and then West Ham and even Tottenham are having good seasons, and everyone's bemoaning Manchester United and Arsenal, but they're still 6th and 7th in the table. Yeah. So the kind of irony about this Leicester Newcastle game is that if Leicester win, then we're suddenly right on the cusp, points wise at least, of 5th or 6th place. And if you win 2 running with the busy festive period, you could easily be somewhere close to West Ham United. And from Newcastle's point of view, if you repeat what you did last time you came to the King Power and batter Leicester, then you move to 13 points, potentially level with Watford, who are outside of the relegation zone. And suddenly this whole notion of a crisis that Newcastle are stranded towards the foot of the table, and because of what history says at this stage of the season, are never going to stay up. Well, it's nonsense, because first of all, it's going to be quite a low total to stay up this season. And second of all, as soon as you're within 3 points of safety at any stage of the season, history doesn't really matter, because you're not looking at it in terms of what history says. You're looking at it in terms of win 1 game, your fate's in your own hands, and suddenly you're not in the relegation zone anymore. So it's a really pivotal few games, and everyone sort of talks about the festive period, but I actually think we're in what I would term the pre-festive period, the end of November and the first kind of 2 weeks of December, before we get the games every 3 days, before we get around Boxing Day and New Year's. And that pre-festive period really solidifies and defines the table, games number 16 to 20 for me. That's when we'll really know what the table's looking like. And I think that that's equally true of Leicester as it is of Newcastle.
I have to agree. And look, I'm going to pass this over to Chris, because Chris, you've had this kind of this thought about Newcastle at the moment, in that obviously there's so many fans out there at the moment that are saying, you know, we're down at the sort of in the dungeon of the Premier League, and it's going to be a nightmare to get out of it. But we've always had that mindset that, you know, a couple of wins and we can be up there and in and around things from sort of 17th and above. And it's quite simply, it's quite as easy as that. You know, we get a result. The 3 points on Sunday, as Ben said, against Newcastle, against Leicester, and look what could happen. We're up there with the likes of Watford and 1 or 2 others, and it doesn't look that bad, then, does it?
No, I completely agree. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, even after that win against Burnley, you look at the league table all of a sudden and you think, do you know what? There's not much in it. I mean, obviously Everton got the win, didn't they, against Arsenal? That pushed them further ahead of us. I think Everton are on 18 now. So they've gone away. But to be fair, I don't think Everton were ever going to be in our sights, really. But yeah, it's amazing what, you know, 3 points can do. And as Ben rightly said, you know, if we were to win at the weekend, all of a sudden we're on 13 points level with Watford, and you're looking up the table rather than down. So I think like Ben said, if we get to, I've been saying this for a while, Ben, if we get to January with about 14, 15 points, I personally think that, you know, we'll be okay. If we stay on 10 points and we go on this big, massive losing streak, then obviously that's going to be an issue. But it, you know, really this season, you're probably looking at around, I'd say 36, 37 points to stay up. And we've been saying from the start of the season, haven't we, Pete? Obviously, this isn't the start that we wanted to make, but you've got to remember we've had our horrible run. And there's been clubs who are ahead of us at the moment, but they've been playing well. They've been getting results, but they will peter out. That won't continue the form that they've been in. I mean, you look at the likes of Brentford, beating Arsenal and picking up points here and there, and you know they're not a million miles away from us. And you look at like Palace. Palace made a fantastic start to the season, and now all of a sudden they're starting to stutter a little bit. I personally look at the league, and I think that I could name at least 4 or 5 teams whose squads aren't as strong as ours. You only have to look at our front three. I mean, Ben, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but you look at St. Maximin and Wilson and Miggy Almiron and Joe Linton, who's massively improved, as you say, and you feel like that's enough. That's enough to get us enough points on the board to stay up, and that's without taking into account January, where you would like to think we're going to make 3 or 4 shrewd signings. and that can lift your squad. And we will pick up points where we're not expecting them, but we'll have to wait and see. But I still remain really hopeful. I'll be honest.
I think I agree with you, and I think that it's sort of important not to get carried away by the hype of the takeover. It's almost like everyone's looking 2 steps, 3 steps, 2 seasons, 3 seasons ahead, which is absolutely fine. You know, who am I to say football fans can't dream and plan ahead and hope and love their club? But it's also crucial to realise that Newcastle are in a relegation fight, and whether or not they move out the relegation zone this weekend or next weekend, I still see them wobbling and being there or thereabouts and finishing probably on, let's say, under 45 points this season. And probably even if they get to 40 points, not getting 40 points until game 35, 36, 37. So that might suggest a strong January window and a pickup in form at the back end of the season, much like Newcastle picked up their form under Steve Bruce when they stayed up, including that 5-0 win over Leicester. My worry for Newcastle, and the reason why I say not to get carried away, is just the fixtures in December. So if I score them, Leicester, 0 points, I'm bound to say, obviously, but it's actually one of the easier fixtures based on current form. It probably is something where if I take away my fox-tinted glasses, Newcastle could get something from the game. But away at Liverpool, they shouldn't get anything. Home to Manchester City, they shouldn't get anything. Home to Manchester United under Ralph Rangnick, they might not get anything. Away at Everton, you see how spirited Everton were in battling back against Arsenal, may not get anything. Away at Southampton, not an easy fixture. So if they come through that period with even 4 points, even if that season go down the table, not up the table, I'd be quite encouraged if I was a Newcastle United fan, because it's probably 4 points where you're saying, I wasn't expecting those 4 points. It's a bonus 4 points. Yeah. Come through it with 0 points, alarm bells, alarm bells, alarm bells. You come through it with more than 4 points, regardless of where you are in the table, there'll be enough there to suggest, especially with the January window, that Newcastle United will be nowhere near relegation.
It's funny you say that, Ben, because and Peter will remember this. I've been saying now for the past few weeks, 4 points. If we get 4 points, I think that'd be good. And you rightly say, yeah, if we get over 4 points, I think there'll be a bit of confidence even, because, as I say, things can only improve from January. I'm not expecting us to go and sign 30, 40, 50 million pound players, but I know that we will bring in players who are considerably better than what we've got now, which in some positions will not be too difficult. And I would like to think that, you know, the club have lined up a couple of signings, and if they come in and hit the ground running, look what Lingard did at West Ham last season, something like that, or what Willock did at us on loan. That's all it takes.
Definitely, it's a case of you know, I think most Newcastle fans have earmarked this game on Sunday against Leicester away for the fact that Leicester haven't been playing well, and for the points that Ben's already mentioned, the fact that they're leaking goals, that they don't look as sharp up front as what they were, although they've still got talented players. And then I think Everton away, because we won at those 2 places last season, I think we're earmarking those places. And I think I think if we can get out of this period with 3 or 4 points, and we're still within touching distance like we are now of that 17th and above, I would be confident, like Ben said, that we could go in January and strengthen the team. But also in January, February, we've got some favourable fixtures against teams that are in and around us that we could not only just beat and take 3 points off, but then potentially go above those teams and really sort of kick us onto the next stage. So it's a really kind of crucial time for this part this season. And as well, you know, I think Chris put it up a second ago. You know, Geordie Toon for Life has said Leeds, who are not that far away from us, play Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool, and Villa. Okay, and this will be the case for a number of other clubs. We're going for our moment now in December. I would much rather go through that moment now in December, that when we've strengthened our team potentially and got those players in January, February, March, that we're playing teams in around us, that we can actually take points off those teams where those teams like your Leeds, your Villas, your Brentfords, your Burnleys are going through their period where they're playing all the top teams. And so the table could look very different very quickly. I keep referring to the point of Fulham last season. Fulham looked dead and buried at this point last year. They looked like they were gone. They were written off. All of a sudden, they put 3 or 4 results together, and they're within touching distance of us. Now, they didn't have enough to go that next stage, but I believe with the strengthened team and with Eddie Howe at the helm, who's a significantly better than manager than Scott Parker, and we have significantly better players than Fulham did last season, that we could go one better and we could actually get out of the bottom 3. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I agree that Newcastle on paper are stronger than where they're currently positioned suggests. And I think that the reason why they're down there is because of that lack of kind of collective unity. So when you just see the squad on paper, you're like, fine, individuals can win the game, but those individual moments can just as easily be offset by errors. But there hasn't really been that kind of like collective performance. And that's not being critical of the squad. It's actually being critical of the kind of strategy under Steve Bruce. There were players that didn't know where they were supposed to play, how they were supposed to play, and in what direction the team were heading. So, you know, if you're going to employ the counter press, if you're going to play counter-attacking football, if you're going to play with width, if you're going to play a high line, a low line, and so on, everyone needs to know their roles. And I think that Newcastle came out into too many games with their kind of head down in the first half, almost just setting up a wall not to lose matches. And then they lost a goal and it kicked them into gear. And they were a completely different team in second halves. And the other thing under Bruce was just that the same squad of players essentially as now were largely taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And now the difference is that Eddie Howe is not going to stand for a squad that don't know what they're doing and don't know how to do that for 90 minutes, whether they win 5-0 or whether they lose 5-0. And, you know, Kevin Keegan always used to say, and people talk about the atmosphere at St James's Park, which has been sensational since the new ownership group have come in. But Kevin Keegan always used to say that that atmosphere can work for or against you. And essentially, there's a club in Spain called Rayo Vallecano who are not as big as Newcastle United, but they've got an incredibly passionate fan base. And basically, the saying there in Spanish is that you either leave the Vallecano stadium on the shoulders of the fans or in an ambulance. And I'm not quite saying it's the same at St James's Park, but the fan base are driving that team and their mentality. And you are either walking out of St James's Park as a hero or you're walking outside of St James's Park in a villain. It's probably not quite the sense that you're leaving in an ambulance. Some would say I might be leaving in an ambulance if I turn up to St James's Park, because there's certain Newcastle fans that are probably waiting for me to say a not so friendly hello. But generally speaking, for the players, you're driven by that atmosphere, but that atmosphere can also kind of work against you. And when you're at a club like Newcastle, there'll actually be times if the form isn't with you as a player or collectively as a team, you might quite like to almost be back in front of an empty stadium or playing away from home. And that's not to be critical of the fan base, but it's just they rightly make their voices heard, both positively and negatively. And Kevin Keegan always used to say that, therefore, your first challenge at St James's Park is to win over the fan base in the first 5 minutes of every single match that you play in each half. So that first 5 minutes or even 15 minutes and that first 5 minutes of the second half is vitally important. And it might not be about scoring, and it might not even matter what the scoreline is, but you've got to show as you kick that game off in that first 5 minutes that you mean business. Even if that's sliding in through the mud and picking up a yellow card, even if that's making a tireless run and not conserving your energy like you might traditionally do it, even if it's just playing a positive pass, because immediately it says to the fan base in both halves, these guys are on it. These guys are prepared to put blood and sweat on the shirts. And I think, without exaggerating to the point of hyperbole, because we're not really there yet in terms of how long he's been in charge, but there's a notable difference in terms of that energy and application and passion carried by the crest of the new takeover under Eddie Howe than there was under Steve Bruce. So that's the first battle. And now the second battle is translating that energy and passion into points. And a part of that, if Newcastle squad can't just do it themselves, is in the January window, making sure that you sign players that are well aware what Newcastle United stands for and what's expected at this football club. Because much like Manchester United and other clubs, if you bring in the wrong kind of player, regardless of what their football CV says, and the fan base don't warm to them, then you immediately and unfortunately have a scenario where a good player just doesn't succeed at a club of Newcastle's magnitude because they're the wrong fit. So it's about finding a good player that can move Newcastle United out of the relegation zone and towards European football over 2 to 3 seasons. But it's also about signing players that are the right fit at that football club and in that dressing room.
I 100% agree with you. And I don't know if you agree, Chris, but that response there from Ben sounds like a response of a Newcastle fan.
It does.
I
sense the passion. No, do you know what was interesting about what Ben said? Pete, I can't for the life of me remember who it is. I want to say Cardiff, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
There's a clip, isn't there? A famous clip of where about 4 or 5 tasty tackles go in. And
Leicester.
The stadium's Leicester. Oh, was it right? Okay, yeah. And the stadium is absolutely bouncing. And it's just for that effort and that endeavour and that want to, win, if you like. And so Ben's absolutely spot on when he says that.
My first ever experience of winning away at Leicester, I'd been to so many over the years, never quite got to see the win, and I was there not expecting a win, and we did. And I remember, honestly, it was I still remember watching it now from the stands, from the away end, and actually feeling quite emotional about it. We started strong. Shelby got the first goal, but that passion where we were 2-0 up, and we could have been quite easy and comfortable and sat back. But you had Dummett popping in with challenges, Perez, Shelby, Richie. You had all those guys. Diame was there at the time, who was brilliant, just banging into tackles, and we were cheering every one of them like it was a goal. And I remember looking over, because we're near the Kop. Where I was standing, we were on the left-hand side of the away end, and that was where the main Kop is, where they make all their noise. You've got Jobber banging on the drums at the top, but we completely outsang them that game, and every chant was like a goal being scored. We stayed in the stadium 25 minutes after the game. It was amazing. It was amazing. And it's that type of passion, it's that type of endeavour that we see in Eddie Howe, and that's why I've just got even more renewed confidence that regardless of this run in December, that we're going to stay in the league, because as Ben said, and he's absolutely right, he demands the best. He demands every ounce of energy given on that football pitch, on that training pitch, from every single player in the squad, whether you're playing every week, whether you're on the bench. And you know what? A lot of people have talked about it as well since the game on Saturday. But within that win, you had Sean Longstaff, you had Dwight Gale, you had Jeff Hendricks, you had so many, Jacob Murphy, all players that weren't playing in that game or didn't really contribute to that game, that were celebrating and beaming with smiles just as much as the players that were on the pitch that made the difference. That's Eddie Howe, that is. That's Eddie Howe. He's made that happen, because that definitely wasn't happening for the last 2 years under Steve Bruce.
No.
And I just, Ben's absolutely right in his points, and it just fills me with confidence.
I mean, I was just going to add, though, like, it is Eddie Howe and it isn't Eddie Howe. It's anybody that isn't Steve Bruce. And it's also, in part, a kind of relief that there's now a manager in place as well. And I genuinely believe that the next person to follow Steve Bruce was always going to get a huge honeymoon period because of a combination of their credentials plus the potential to develop at the football club under the new ownership, due to the fact that they're prepared to invest in both the club and the community. So it's really easy for a manager to come in and talk about the ambition. And there's obviously two extremes that you wouldn't normally get, because if you had a manager coming in and talking about winning, say, the Premier League, you'd expect that club to be up there challenging for the Premier League. So the line for doing that is probably drawn at Ralph Rangnick and Manchester United. And even if he started talking about winning the Premier League, quite a lot of people would raise their eyebrows at that. And obviously, nobody's saying at Newcastle they are going to win the Premier League or anything this season. But the point is that everyone at the football club is talking like they're on a road to Champions League. And the only way that you get into the Champions League consistently, or obviously even once, is if you're in the top 4 and therefore challenging for Premier Leagues as well. So realistically, there's this odd extreme of like where Newcastle were last season and how they've started this season and how people are talking at the football club now. And if you were bottom of the table as Newcastle were until they got that Burnley win, you'd never normally expect anyone at the club to be using the word ambition, talking about the project being exciting. You'd expect the usual cliches about the struggle, about the fact there's lots of fighting to be done. And Howe sort of has tried to be very humble and level-headed, but it's tough because at the same time as he's saying that publicly, privately, he's probably talking with officials at the club now that are taking him through strategies that are very big, very global, very all-encompassing about building both the football club and the brand. He's probably drawing up a short list knowing that his budget is relatively healthy, albeit within financial fair play. So there is this kind of strange dichotomy of where Newcastle are now and what they're planning towards. And it will be interesting to see how kind of quickly that accelerates. But make no mistake, it's not necessarily how. It's just the fact a cloud has been lifted from the football club. And I actually look at it as very similar to, if we come back to Leicester, the season that Keegan came in at the back end of the season and Newcastle United again were going down in everyone's book, and they came to the old Filbert Street and Stevie Walsh for Leicester scored an own goal, and at the so-called shed end opposite Leicester's main stand at Filbert Street, there was a massive pitch invasion from all the Newcastle fans. And that's why I've got the Newcastle shirt, because I watched them as a kid go into the Premier League and I thought, wow, I remember the day that all those fans invaded Filbert Street. That was cool. They were passionate. They were galvanised. And let's not forget what happened that day was Newcastle stayed up by the skin of their teeth. And then there was a pitch invasion. The fans were buzzing during the off-season. And then Kevin Keegan won his first 10 games in the league the next season to give Newcastle leeway. Then they got promoted to the top division. And they kicked on under Keegan from there and obviously almost ended up winning a Premier League title. So I think that what that sequence shows you is that history will repeat itself. So it's not necessarily about just Ashley being gone. It's not necessarily about just the Saudis coming in. It's not necessarily just about Howe being in charge. The only real thing connecting the football club, the blood of the football club, is the fans. And the fans showed once that when they're happy, when they're excited, when they have energy, whether Newcastle are doing well or not, when they're into it, when they're invested, they're not just a 12th man. They're a 13th and a 14th man compared to other fan bases that just add the 12th man. And they can influence games home and away more than probably almost any other fan base in the Premier League. And in addition to that, they can drag their football club down. So as a collective fan base, it's quite hard to police that at times. So it's chicken and egg, because the fan base want to lead things. But if they do that in a negative way, it can actually make things worse at the football club. But similarly, if the football club take the first step and do just get a win or two, then the fan base are going to snowball that, and Newcastle United are going to go from strength to strength. So it's actually quite volatile in a brilliant way, in a wonderful way, but also in quite a kind of dangerous way. And that's what I love about the fan base and the culture of Newcastle United, that you constantly feel this like raw and pressure cooker that can like give you a perfect storm or can just give you a demise on the football field. And right now, because of that honeymoon period under the new ownership group, it's very likely that the fan base are going to be a bit more considered, a bit more patient, because they're just buzzing about the longer term potential. And that might change permanently. And it might make the Newcastle United fan base just a little bit more sanguine at times in a positive way when they need to be. But regardless of that, make no mistake, this isn't just about one thing. This is effectively about a football club being reignited again. And history tells us when Newcastle United are reignited, they're very, very difficult to stop.
I 100% agree with you. And you make some fantastic points. The fans are, the blood of the club. And I think, since the takeover's happened, I think that's been proven. The way we've sort of galvanised the club, with the way the results were going, the way in which we've been playing, even in the transition of Eddie Howe, the fans have continued to get behind and back the team. And you're right, we're not just the 12th man, we are the 13th and 14th without a doubt, and we're going to need to be for the remaining games of the season, 100%. Just before we, because I know our time's short with you tonight, Ben, and we appreciate the time that you're giving with us. I do want to get into the game on Sunday. I want to get some stats, and we all know what that means in a second. But just before we do that, I'm just going to go back to the chat. I think Chris might have already put it up, but we have Bronwyn in the chat tonight, and she said, "Lads, how you doing, Bronwyn? Lads, my dad is watching. Say hello to William." He said, "This is a great episode." And you know what, William? You are not wrong. So how you doing, William? Pleasure to meet you a few weeks ago. Great guy. I'm glad you're enjoying the show, and it's a perfect opportunity to plug our sponsor, so blackandwhitearmy.com, co.uk, should I say. Lots and lots of fantastic clothing line available. This one especially, I'm going to get for my daughter, because
you love that, don't you?
My daughter saw that the other day, and she was like, "You know what? I really like that." So that will be purchased shortly. Some other gear here for you guys to purchase, and I know it's been a very, very successful time since the launch. Bronwyn is so appreciative of all the support from Newcastle fans, lots of which are in the chat tonight. So massive thank you to you guys for your support with Bronwyn, and please go to the website and keep supporting that cause. And William, Bronwyn, keep enjoying the show. Now we're going to get into the game. We're going to look at some stats. And you know what? There's only one way we look at stats, and it's Mr. Keith.
Evening, lads. Evening,
Keith.
How you doing, Keith? You okay?
Spot on. Welcome, Ben. Nice to see you and meet you, Ben.
How are you, Keith?
Hope you're well. Hope you're all well.
Right, Keith. Always has the best entrance of anyone that comes on Loaded, without a doubt. And we had to have that playing whilst Ben was in the studio with us, because you had to have that view. Keith, big game on Sunday. We've already talked about it lots and lots. What are the stats with regards to this game? Are we looking positive, or is it going to be another one where it's going to be a little bit awkward for Newcastle fans?
It's one of those where Newcastle traditionally, it's sort of, I would say it's quite split down the middle again, really. Slight edge towards Newcastle historically, until the last 6 years, I would say. But Newcastle's record in this fixture since 94-95, played 30, won 13, drawn 6 and lost 11. The fixtures generally produced a lot of goals, 78 goals in league fixtures in that time. Slightly more for Leicester, 43 to Newcastle's 34, and Leicester also have the slightly better defensive record as well. 10 clean sheets to Newcastle's 7 in this fixture. Believe it or not, there hasn't been there's been 3 0-0 draws in 30 of those games. The last draw, though, we have to go back to 2003-04, Sir Bobby Robson's season. I touched on before there, not such a good record in the last 6 years. Newcastle have lost 10 of the last 13 games against Leicester. I know, awful. Don't laugh, Ben, please. But 3 wins of those wins have came at the King Power Stadium, and Newcastle's record at the King Power away is better than St James's. They've won 3 of those last 6 games, and whereas they've only won 1 of 6 at St James's. Most common goal scorers in this fixture for Leicester, Jamie Vardy with 5 in 11 games, and also James Maddison's got 3 and 6 as well in this fixture, and they're both the top goal scorers for Leicester this season. Whereas Callum Wilson, his goal scoring record against Leicester, 4 goals in 9 games. Brendan Rodgers, his record as a manager against Newcastle, he's managed 15 games. He's won 7, drawn 3, and lost 5. So sort of like over 1.5 points a game average. Whereas Eddie Howe, his record in games against Leicester, he's managed 16, he's won 3, drawn 6, and lost 7. So he's got quite a lot of few draws there. So there's a chance of maybe a point on Sunday.
Interesting. What do you make of those stats, Ben?
All I remember is Leicester 5, Newcastle 0. The 4-2 victory has been blotted eternally from the memory. I think that the history isn't as much of a factor because actually both sides are very different. Not necessarily in terms of personnel from last season, but Leicester are suddenly conceding a ton and Newcastle are on a crest of a wave. So it's not a typical fixture between the two sides. And there obviously might be an element of fatigue from some of the players that played against Napoli if they're selected for the weekend. So I can't think of a better time for Newcastle United to be travelling to the King Power Stadium, other than the fact that Leicester will be a little bit wounded after going out of the Europa League. But if they can draw on the May win, the 4-2 victory at the King Power Stadium, and that Burnley victory last time out, now they've kind of taken that stigma of not having won in the Premier League off them. Then as long as they can carry that momentum forwards, I do think genuinely, if I sort of put my Leicester allegiances aside, that they can get something from the game, simply because there's goal scorers in this Newcastle United side and there's threats. And as I say, they're up against a Leicester defence that are leaking goals left, right and centre. So the stats are interesting because, as Keith says, they kind of like play into Leicester's hands. Like Newcastle's, from memory, only wins have come, I think, in recent history, in the last 3 years or so. There was the 2-1 victory at the King Power, I think, in 2018. A year later, they certainly won by a 0-0, and there was the 4-2. But I can't think of many other victories, certainly not in the Premier League, unless you cast yourself back to kind of 2014 and beyond. What I would say is that Newcastle also concede a lot of goals too. So as per many of these recent games, both sides will probably score in the game, and there aren't too many 0-0s. There was the 4-2, the game before that at St James's Park, Leicester won 2-1, and Leicester scored 3 at St James's Park, and then 5 in the Premier League at home in their September and January meetings in 19 and 20. So this is a good fixture for Leicester in terms of there's a history of our forwards getting back on track and scoring goals. And what we've seen tonight is we've seen Maddison miss a sitter. We've seen Daka put one in the side netting. We've seen Vardy off the boil. So they'll be looking at Newcastle and thinking, okay, this is also a leaky defence and a good fixture for us to try and do some damage and get our season back on track. So I expect quite a high-scoring game. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if it's kind of like a 2-2 draw and Newcastle do get something from the game.
Well, I tell you what, I wouldn't argue against that one whatsoever. Now, I know your time is short, so before you go, Ben, because myself, Chris and Pete, Chris and Keith will talk some predictions briefly after you leave the chat. But before you go, very quickly, your 3 players that we need to be worried about at Leicester, and the 3 players that Leicester need to be worried about when Newcastle come up against you, and what your prediction is for Sunday's game.
I mean, I've given away the prediction. I genuinely think it will be 2-2. I think that the players that Newcastle need to be concerned about is Kasper Schmeichel, because he's just had a knack of making kind of key worldy saves. And even though he's been tested more than he's perhaps used to, I think Newcastle will be a lot more conservative, certainly than Arsenal and Chelsea when they visited the King Power Stadium. So don't expect Schmeichel to be tested that often. And therefore, when Newcastle test him, just be aware that he has been an outstanding shot stopper, not just this season, but really for the last 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, he's a goalkeeper that made the best goalkeeper of the year list in the Ballon d'Or. And even though he didn't win, Donnarumma won that award. It tells you absolutely everything. We got one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League, plain and simple. Then looking a little bit further ahead, I mean, Newcastle fans will know all about Leicester's star performers, particularly Tielemans, who they all want to try and steal off us. So thinking of kind of players that perhaps Newcastle fans won't know as much, that I would expect to start the game. Harvey Barnes is probably the other player that can just kind of creep almost silently into the box, unnoticed, a lot of composure, a lot of strength, and a good football brain. And if he gets ticking, even though Leicester fans might not agree with me on this, I think he's more of a threat than James Maddison at the moment. So beware of him. And then in a super sub capacity, I'm going to throw Perez into the mix, simply because he might come on and haunt you. I mean, you all know about Vardy, so I wouldn't be telling you anything new. And you obviously know that Iheanacho has been on form. But, we spoke earlier about him needing something to kick him on, something to really earn his place in the team. And it might be against his former club, where he just goes that extra level, in all likelihood, off the bench to try and turn the game in Leicester's favour. And then, Leicester should be worried about Callum Wilson, obviously, because he's the kind of player at the moment that I think is just doing everything for Newcastle United. I think that he's kind of found a way, hasn't he, to just take his chances. So it'll be an interesting battle between Wilson, if he gets a clear-cut opportunity, and Kasper Schmeichel. Shah's the other one for me. I know that not every Newcastle fan likes him, but I believe he got the assist for the Newcastle goal against Burnley. And
Unorthodox assist.
Say again?
A very unorthodox assist.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
But
I like the fact that he has more of a no fear mentality. I like the fact that he's kind of ball playing. So it wouldn't surprise me whether he has an important role to play. And then, I know that Joel Linton is improving, but I don't think Leicester will be particularly terrified by him. And obviously, St. Maximin is always someone that would be your obvious choice. But I think it's Willock again, who I don't think has necessarily hit the heights of that kind of crazy back end of last season, where he was kind of pulling Newcastle out of trouble left, right and centre. But I do think that he can still be a big occasion player for Newcastle United. And, with Leicester drawn towards perhaps the threat of ASM and Wilson, and also maybe looking at Almiron and Newcastle's width, it's possibly an opportunity for Willock to go a bit more, I don't want to say unnoticed, but certainly at times unpoliced because of how Leicester will set up. And if that eventuality happens, he's a player very capable of punishing Leicester. So I expect a lot of chances in the game. And I think we'll be talking about most of those names I've mentioned for both sides having opportunities or creating opportunities. And it won't be necessarily one of those games that's cagey, has few chances in it. Obviously, Newcastle in the first half might set up a bit more defensive minded, but if they grow in confidence during the game, I think it will end up end to end and become more enjoyable as the game goes on, which is probably true of Burnley as well, where Newcastle got sucked into a very dogged Burnley-like display in half an hour and then were more expansive and grew in confidence as the game went on. And I think we'll see something very similar. And therefore, if players that I've mentioned are on form for both sides and we get an early goal in the game and both sides really go for it, I think we're going to see a really good spectacle. And as I say, I hope Leicester nick it 3-2, but my prediction is 2-2.
No, can't argue with that.
And one final thing, Pete, I just wanted to say as well before I bolt is obviously it's in Leicester. I'll be working down there for CBS, who I took a new job with a couple of months ago. And therefore, any Newcastle fans coming down to Leicester, even though they'll be working during the game, reach out. Pete, yourself, hit me up.
Me and Chris are there. Both Chris are there.
Chris is coming as well. Great. Yeah, hit me up on Twitter. And, hopefully we can find a pub after the game or something. I know it's a long journey back to Newcastle, so many of you might be bolting, but if anyone's staying around, let's at least try and have a beer. And if it finishes 2-2, it will be a very happy beer all around.
I would agree with that, and 100%. I will send you a message, and we will definitely catch up on Sunday. But I thank you so much, Ben, for taking the time to join us. I know you've got lots of work to do, and your time is precious. We'd love to have you on again for the turnaround. When you come to St James's Park later on in the season. But for now, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully a collective we are celebrating the 3 points with a black and white on Sunday.
Boo! Enjoy your trip down to Leicester. Safe travels, guys, and absolute pleasure. And hopefully see you in Leicester at the weekend.
Definitely.
Thanks, Ben.
You take care, Ben.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Brilliant. I knew it was going to be fantastic to have Ben on the show this evening, and always great perspective from not just from a Leicester point of view, but also from a Newcastle point of view. And predicted a 2-2 draw. Lads, would you take it? Chris, start with you.
Mate, away from home, taking a point all day long.
That is your motto, isn't it?
Yeah, I just love it. I love it, mate. Especially against a side like Leicester. If you offered me a point now, I'd take it. I'd snap your hand off. But there was a bit of confidence there from Brian in the chat. Brian Johnson, he's saying 3-0. And Brian, I tell you what, mate, if it's 3-0, I'll be buzzing. But I would take a point right now. I've got to be honest, but I do think there is an opportunity. I mean, it's a great time to play Leicester, as we've already discussed. They're not in the greatest of form at the moment. I think this COVID issue is a factor. I think the fact they played in Italy tonight is a factor. So you couldn't really have asked for a better time to play them, could you?
I agree. And obviously, I think Ben alluded to the fact that they've lost tonight, that they might be sort of like a wounded animal. But actually, on the flip side of that, with COVID and illness, could it be a little bit of a hangover that we could expose on Sunday and kind of pile on the misery for Leicester? And, the one thing we didn't touch on, but we can touch on it maybe another time, is that Brendan Rodgers, certainly from what I hear when I speak to a lot of the Leicester fans in Leicester, is that Brendan Rodgers is under a little bit of pressure at the moment. They're not playing well. And the fact that they've gone out of Europe as well adds the pressure onto Brendan Rodgers. For a manager that was heavily linked to a new consortium with Newcastle, was linked a couple of years ago with Arsenal, now been linked more recently with Manchester United, and still could be Man United's next manager come the summer. There's no reason why he couldn't be. Has that affected him? Has that changed his mindset? Has that kind of influenced maybe some of the poor performances that we've seen from Leicester, and can we exploit that? But from your perspective, Keith, would you take a draw? Would you take the 2-2 that Ben said?
Absolutely, Pete. I'd take it off. I'd snap somebody's hand off for a point right now, because Leicester, I think, Leicester's had that rise in the last 6 years. They won the title and they won the FA Cup last year. Newcastle have really suffered in that time. And it's a game I've always dreaded. In particular, I can remember 2 seasons ago over the Christmas and New Year when they came to St James's, and they just turned Newcastle over 3-0. And I'm like, it's one of those games I just dread. And that was on the back of the 5-0 a few months earlier as well at the King Power. So yeah, I'd definitely take a point. I think, it is a difficult place to sort of travel to, where they've been as well in Napoli, the Italy trip. And I think you've raised some really good points there, Chris, about the COVID issues as well. There's obviously concerns there, just like on a bigger scale there is at Tottenham at the minute. So it might be a good time to play them in that respect. And again, the form hasn't been great. They're about 9 points, 10 points worse off than they were this stage last season after 15 games. So it's a good. And the question is as well, have we turned the corner? With that win last week, and the positive feel just after, like before the Norwich game, not getting beat against Norwich. They're on a little bit of an unbeaten run, maybe, and can they stretch it out to get a point against Leicester on Sunday?
Chris, if you could put
course.
the comment from Tom Dixon back up, if possible.
Yeah, there you go, mate.
Because obviously it's an interesting list there that are potentially the ones that have COVID or an illness that could be out on Sunday. So you got Kelechi Iheanacho, you got Ayoze Perez, Lookman, Vestergaard, Amati, Benkovic, and Vontae Daly-Campbell. And you're looking at that list, you're probably thinking, well, none of them are really going to start. Are they really going to be part of that team? But you know what? I think of it from the other end of things. They've just played a tough game, a game that they had to play a maximum of 90 minutes. That strongest 11 for Leicester have just played 94 minutes of that game.
Yeah.
Right? They've got a 48-hour turnaround potentially before then they play against us on Sunday, and are likely to play the same team. Now, we don't know whether there's knocks coming out of that. We don't know how tired they're going to be. They're probably going to be shattered with the travelling as well. One or two of those players, in my opinion, would have started that game and would have been fresh on Sunday. The fact that they're not there means that Leicester starting lineup have pretty much, because if you look at the bench, there was nothing on the bench, nothing of any note. That team that have already played 95 minutes tonight have then got to go and play another 90 minutes because there's not likely to be many changes. No one off the bench really kind of screams out at you that's going to change the game.
No.
Is that going to come in our favour? So yes, they don't. Those players on that list are not going to start the game, but they also can't come off the bench if they've got COVID. They can't come off the bench and influence the game later on. We know what Iheanacho did. He scored against us in the 4-2 and kind of brought the fight back on, although it never happened. Perez has scored against us before. We know what he can give. Lookman's a tricky player. Vestergaard's got height from set pieces. They've got players like that they haven't got choices of now. So is it, as the game goes on later, that Newcastle are going to benefit? And we've already talked about how fit we look at the moment as a team, as a squad. And Ben talked about it quite rightly, that later on in that second half, we had just over 15-minute spell where we were pummeling Burnley. We were really pushing for that result. Could it be, if we're still in a game at that point in the game, that we're in a position to really take the game to Leicester? It's going to be really interesting.
You'd think so, wouldn't you, Pete? Because like you say, it's not just the travelling; it's the minutes, isn't it? Like I can see Vardy's had a full 90 minutes there. James Maddison's had a full 90 minutes. Wilfred Ndidi's had a full 90 minutes, and the back four of Bertrand, Soyuncu, Evans, and Castagna, they've all had a full 90 minutes. So there's going to be some tired players. Let's assume they're flying home tonight. They're going to go home. They're going to be up tomorrow, probably training, or maybe he'll give them a day off. I don't know. And then all of a sudden we've hit Saturday. So it's interesting because they've not got those options, and maybe Rodgers would have liked to rotate and maybe bring in 2 or 3 of those players at least. I think Vestergaard would have started. Lookman, I'm a fan of Lookman, and he would have caused us some problems. Iheanacho, as you rightly said, and I think Ben touched on it earlier, saying that over the last 12 to 18 months he's really improved. Yeah. So there is some positives in there, and I do think that it's a great time to play Leicester. I mean, what do you think, Keith? Do you share the positivity me and Pete have got?
Yeah, I definitely share a lot more now than last season, because Leicester had made such a good start to last season. If you remember, they went to Southampton and St Mary's and won 9-0. Results like that. I think they'd only lost 3 games and they'd won pretty much every other game at this point last year. This year their form's a little bit indifferent, and they're only 3 wins better than Newcastle at the moment. So I am more confident and heartened with that. And I think you've touched on a good point there about, obviously earlier, about Napoli, a really hard game. Had Leicester's European campaign been a bit better, if they'd had a stronger one with a few better results in there, more positive results, they might have been able to go into this game in the Europa League safe, and they might have been able to sort of rotate and have players really fresh for Sunday, in the squad. But they've had a really hard game out there tonight, back and forward, and they've lost. And that's bound to have a little bit of an impact. Will there be a bit of a hangover there? For Sunday's game, and that game, I get heartened by that as well.
Yeah,
I agree. Great points as well, Keith, in the chat, and Chris has just put this up a second ago. But Tom, I agree with you. The Leicester players look tired. They looked tired. As Keith has rightly said, Leicester were pushing right until the 95th minute to try and get something. That extra bit of energy is going to be taken out of them, which is going to affect their energy levels going into Sunday. It can only mean a positive thing. But ultimately, we as a team have got to prepare right, which I'm sure we will. Eddie Howe's got to keep their fitness levels up, make sure that we don't pick up any injuries or any COVID cases, and be fully ready to go out there and exploit Leicester's weaknesses. But yeah, we'll definitely tackle this question here. What team would you play against Leicester? Would you start the same side that beat Burnley at the weekend? So rather than name the team, would you, and we'll start with Chris, we'll work down to Keith, would you start the same 11, or would there be any tweaks that you would make to the starting lineup?
I think you would have to start the same 11. The only option for me, and I'm basing this purely, by the way, off the training video which the club put out. I thought Ryan Fraser looked really sharp, and obviously he was missing last week, wasn't he? Which I found to be a bit of a surprise, because he was just out the squad. So whether he was unwell, or was it a hamstring? Right, okay.
Yeah, the minor hamstring injury, but he's fully recovered from it now. So
yeah, he looked really sharp on that video, and I do think Ryan Fraser's got more to give. And I think since Eddie Howe's come in, he's got a spring in his step. So possibly Ryan Fraser, but maybe just have the same starting 11 and have Fraser primed on the bench, ready to come on. Because I think if you dropped any of the players from the weekend, it would be a little bit harsh, because they performed well. We got the 3 points. We kept the clean sheet. So maybe it would be naive to change the team.
Great point. Keith, would you make some changes, formation, personnel, or would you keep it exactly the same like Chris has said?
I think again, Chris, it's a good point about that starting team on Saturday in a lot of respects. With me, I just think, again, really positive in the sense of they kept a clean sheet, for the first time in, I don't know, since the back end of last season, and they were pushing in that second half as well to finish the game off, which I've not seen Newcastle finish as strong this season. Really, they've wilted in games. They've wilted in some respects after 15 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. And I think this is I wouldn't make too many tweaks to it. I just think you build from the back as well. This having that lineup at the back, having Clark out the side, ironically, it seemed to strengthen Newcastle a little bit, and Fernandez being back in the lineup, Dubravka back for the second game in a row. I wouldn't make too many tweaks. Maybe on the bench, maybe if he's fit, bring, and you need a bit of pace, or you need that crossing. Maybe bring Fraser on in the second half to change things up.
Interestingly, Keith, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, I don't think Fernandez started last game, did he? I think it was Shard and Lascelles.
That was right. Fernandez came on and they went to a back three to kind of shore things up.
And he's done a great job again.
He shored things up. He looked solid. Yeah. So, I mean, that would be my only sort of... Not that I would change it, because I agree with both of you. You tend to keep a winning side, particularly a side that's not conceded a goal. But because we're away from home and because we know the threats of Leicester, does Eddie Howe change it and maybe go 3 at the back and bring someone like
Fernandez in?
To solidify that back line, make it hard to beat, and then maybe depending on how the game opens up, do we then bring on an attacking player, bring one of the defenders off and go more attacking in the second half, or vice versa? Do we start the way in which we all think we're going to start? Is it the same team? And then maybe if we're winning, or we're holding on to something, do we do the same again? Do we bring on another defender in shut up shop? So it'll be really, really interesting. But yeah, I saw that question from Toon LA Old Guard. Look, Lascelles will start and he'll be the captain. I don't think a permanent captain will be changed until the summer, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, Yano, I agree. Worry about the lack of pace in the defence. But you know, this is what Howe wants. He wants the higher line, and if we press them further back, is it going to create chances for us?
That's it. That's an interesting one from Paul. Is Paul saying bring Fraser in from the start for ASM, or is Paul saying let's bring Fraser on for Saint maybe after the 60, 70 minute mark? Because I know St. Maximin got subbed, didn't he, last game, which you don't see all that often.
No, and I think with a busy Christmas festive period, where we're going to have to manage him with regards to injuries as well. That's an interesting one. Fraser's got something more to give. All right, something would be nice. What have you got, mate? Brian Johnson. Jeez, give him a chance, man. He got a start and was subbed after 9 minutes because of Clark Howler. Give him a chance. It'll come good in the end. Yeah, interesting one. We've got Leicester Sunday, Liverpool Thursday night. 2 tough games coming up. They are 2 tough games, but the most winnable game out of the 2 is 100% the Leicester game on Sunday. I think everyone's in an agreement that we're not likely to win the game against Liverpool. But guys, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you guys on the show. Obviously, love sharing the show with Chris. Always a pleasure. Great comments as always, and great questions to Ben tonight, as always too. And Keith, the stat man. Never ever going to get past that video. Your intro is the greatest that I've seen on any of YouTube.
Everybody's jealous now. Where Pete, everybody on the show that comes on is jealous now. They want intros too.
I know. It's even if they got one, Keith, it's not going to be as good as your one.
Exactly. I was just about to say the same. They could demand one, but it's not going to be the same. It's as simple as that.
Paul's clarified it, Pete. Paul's clarified it. He's saying start Fraser and bring Saint on when they are shattered. Very interesting.
Big talking point. And I tell you what, why don't we take that talking point, Paul, and bring that to Friday's Loaded Mag? Because that's what we're going to be on Friday. We've got the boys back on Friday night. Myself, Chris, Mark, Daz, Richie will be there. Loaded Mag to discuss the Leicester preview in a little bit more detail and all things Newcastle United, including those Sports Direct signs. They're down, they're gone, finito. We are finally rid of all the things that we wanted rid of in Newcastle United. And we'll be talking about all that and more on Loaded Mag. But for now, massive thank you to Chris. Massive thank you to Keith. Big thank you to Ben for coming on the show tonight. Thank you all. We had 80 plus watching over the course of this show. Massive thank you to everyone in the chat. Great comments as always. Big following. Brian, Yano, Paul, Tom, and the rest. Jules, who had to leave us early. Fantastic support as always, guys. And as always, we do love playing away. You guys take care. Have a good evening, and we'll catch you on Loaded Man tomorrow.